I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry I cost you so much.
Hush, my child. Please do not say that.
If I survive, I will buy you the biggest house in Atlanta.
And a private...
Cassandra's mine and my getaway ticket to luxury. I will stop whoever stands in the way of my wealth. Can't dance to forget.
Wait, what?
Every single mother carries silent pain, hidden fears, and endless responsibilities, yet she rises each day and keeps trying again. Just like me. My name is Cassandra, and this is my story.
Hi besties! Welcome to my channel, Starlight Afro-Korean Love Stories. I love that this found you because you are important. Please subscribe. Tell me where you are watching from, whether it is Atlanta, Chicago, New York City, or anywhere in the world. Also, feel free to say the time you're watching and grab a popcorn to enjoy this story.
My son told me he was sorry for costing too much money, and I have not been the same woman since. He said it at 7 a.m. in a hospital bed with an IV in his small arm, and his voice so careful and so quiet that I had to press my hand over my mouth to stop myself from falling apart in front of him. Noah is 4 years old. He has survived 3 heart surgeries. He has never once complained about any of it. But this morning, he looked up at me with those serious eyes and said, "Mama, I am sorry I cost so much," and something inside me came apart quietly and completely. I told him he was not a cost. I told him he was the reason I breathed. I told him there was no amount of money on this earth too big for his heart. Then I kissed his forehead, walked into the hospital corridor, and stood there shaking against the wall because the doctor had just told me that Noah needed another surgery within 3 months or his heart would fail completely. $100,000 on top of what insurance refused to cover. I had $6 in my account. I had one option. I called Ren. He answered on the first ring and told me to come to the club tonight and we would talk. His voice was the same as it always was, calm and certain, the voice of a man who had never once been desperate for anything because he had arranged the world, so that desperation only happened to other people. People like me. I went to the club. Performing that night was the hardest thing I have ever done. I was on that pole thinking about the surgery and the money in Noah's face when he said sorry and my mind just left my body completely. My grip opened up and I fell. I hit the stage floor so hard the sound cut through the music, and the whole room went silent. I lay on my back for 2 full seconds staring up at the lights, while my tips scattered around me on the floor and 40 men stared at me, and the music kept playing like nothing had happened. Then the back doors opened. I felt the room change before I saw him. People sat up. Conversations died. Ren walked to the edge of my stage and looked down at me, and what came out of his mouth shattered something in me that I am still not sure I have put back together. "Get up," he said, loud enough for every single person in that room to hear. "These men paid $300 to come here tonight, not to watch you lie on my floor feeling sorry for yourself. Get up right now and do your job, or I will find someone who will." Someone near the bar laughed. I felt that laugh on my skin like a burn. I got up, not for him, for Noah. I walked back to that pole with my hips screaming and my palm bleeding and my face completely smooth, and I finished the set because falling apart was not something I was allowed to do when my son's heart needed fixing, and this man controlled every dollar I earned. After the set, he took me to his office. I stood in the middle of the room and told him about the surgery and the money because I had no pride left to protect. I told him everything, and when I finished, he looked at me for a long moment, and then he stepped toward me and raised his hand to my face and kissed me. No warning, no permission. My entire body went cold. I grabbed his wrist and ripped his hand off my face and slapped him so hard across the jaw that the sound of it cracked off every wall in that office, and my palm burned all the way up to my shoulder. His head snapped to the side. The room went completely still. Then he turned his face back slowly and looked at me and said the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me in my life. "You dance half naked in my club every night for money," he said. His voice was quiet and even and completely without apology. You fell off my pole tonight in front of 40 paying customers because you cannot keep your personal problems out of my building. You came here tonight because you need something from me. Again. He looked at me the way you looked at something you had overpaid for. What exactly did you think gave you the right to put your hands on me? I could not breathe. You kissed me without my permission, I said. And you owe me $258,000, he said. So I suggest you figure out what position you are actually in before you start talking to me about rights. Those words went into me like something cold and sharp, and I stood there in his expensive office in my stage costume with my bleeding hand and my bruised hip. And I felt every single thing I had been holding together all day just give way at once. I picked up my bag. I walked out of his office and through the club and out the front door, and I made it exactly to the alley on the side of the building before I pressed my back against the wall and put both hands over my mouth and cried. Not the quiet, efficient crying I did in bathroom stalls. Real crying. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than tears. The kind that had Noah's face in it, and that doctor's voice, and $100,000, and the specific humiliation of being told that the position I was in meant I had no rights at all. I cried for 4 minutes. Then I wiped my face, got in a cab, and went to my son. Noah was sitting up in his hospital bed, pretending to read when I walked in, and the moment he saw me, his entire face became sunrise. He said Mama Star, and I sat on his bed and pulled him into my arms around all his wires and tubes and pressed my face into his strawberry shampoo hair and held him like the world was ending, because for me tonight it had come very close. He put his small hands on my face and looked at me seriously. Mama, he said softly, you were crying. I am okay now, I said. He looked at me for a long time with those old wise eyes in his small face. Mama Star, he said finally, I am going to be okay, and you are going to be okay, and we are going to be okay together. He said it with the complete certainty of someone who had decided this was true and was not interested in any other version. Right. I looked at my son, at his rebuilt heart beating steadily on the monitor behind him, at the face that trusted me more than he trusted anything else in the world. Right, I said. He fell asleep against me, and I sat in that plastic chair holding his hand and staring at the ceiling and thinking about what Ren had said. Thinking about the way he had looked at me when he said it. Not angry, not guilty, just cold and factual and completely certain that a woman who owed him money was a woman without standing. I thought about that surgery money. I thought about 3 months. I looked at my son's chest rising and falling. And I understood with terrible clarity that tomorrow morning I was going to have to walk back into that building and sit across from that man and negotiate with him like tonight had not happened, like his words were not still living under my skin, like I had not cried in an alley because of him. Because Noah's heart could not wait for my dignity to recover. And that was the most frightening thing of all. Not Ren. Not the debt. Not even the surgery. The fact that I would walk back in there anyway. For my son. Every single time. I walked back into Club Noir the next morning with my chin up and my hands steady, and every single wall I owned built back into place, because falling apart in an alley was something I had done exactly once, and I was not doing it again. Ren's office door was open when I got there. He was sitting behind his desk looking at paperwork like last night had never happened. Like he had not kissed me without permission and told me that owing him money meant I had no rights. He looked up when I walked in and his face was completely neutral, and that neutrality made me angrier than anything else he could have done. Sit down, he said. I will stand, I said. He looked at me for a moment, and then he put his pen down and folded his hands on the desk. The surgery money, he said. I will cover it. My heart jumped before I could stop it. In exchange for what? I said. In exchange for an additional 18 months on your contract, he said. Same terms, same rate, you dance, you pay, you keep your head down and your personal problems out of my building. He picked his pen back up. And what happened last night does not happen again, from either of us. I stood there looking at him, and feeling the specific weight of a person who has no leverage and knows it. "Fine," I said. "Good," he said. "You are on floor rotation tonight." I stopped walking toward the door. "The floor rotation is punishment, and we both know it," I said. "It is a scheduling decision," he said without looking up. "Ren, you are dismissed, Cassandra." I left before I said something that cost Noah his surgery money. That night, I learned exactly what the floor rotation meant. It meant no stage, no distance, no barrier between me and whatever a man with $300 in his pocket decided he was entitled to. I moved through those tables with my professional smile locked in place and my eyes tracking every hand in my vicinity, because on the floor you could not afford to stop tracking. The first hour was manageable. The second hour, a man at table 7, changed everything. He was somewhere in his 50s with a thick neck and small eyes, and the particular confidence of someone who had spent his whole life being told yes. He had been watching me work the room since I started, and I had been carefully steering around his table, but the floor was small, and eventually there was nowhere left to steer. I got close enough to take his order, and his hand landed on my backside immediately like he had been planning it the whole time. Not a brush, not an accident. A full, deliberate grab that sent a bolt of pure humiliation through my entire body and rooted me to the floor for one complete second of white-hot stillness. The men at his table laughed. I looked across the room. Ren was watching from his booth, not moving, not signaling anyone, just watching with his dark eyes and his crossed arms and his face that gave absolutely nothing away. He was going to let this happen. He was going to sit in that booth and let a man put his hands on me and call it a scheduling decision. Something went very cold and very calm inside me. I turned around slowly and faced the man and smiled my most professional smile and leaned down to his level like I was about to tell him something private. "Do that again," I said softly, "and you will regret the day you were born." He grinned. "Relax, sweetheart, it was just a little fun." I drove my knee straight up into his groin, with everything my body owned. The sound he made was not human. He folded forward off his chair and landed on his knees on the floor, and both his hands went down, and the whole table went silent, and I straightened up, smoothed my costume, and walked away like I had simply taken his drink order and found it unsatisfactory. I made it to the bar. Ren appeared beside me, so quickly it was like he had not crossed any distance at all. "Go to the back," he said quietly. "I am fine," I said. "I did not ask if you were fine. Go to the back." "You watched him touch me," I said. I kept my voice low because the bar had ears. "You sat in that booth and watched a man grab me and you did nothing. I was watching to see how you handled it." I turned and looked at him fully, and I did not care who saw it. "I am not something you watch," I said. "I am a person who works in your building, and that man put his hands on me and you sat there." I felt my voice threatening to shake, and I shut that down immediately. "What kind of man does that?" Something moved through his eyes. Fast, there and gone. "The kind who needed to know what you were made of," he said. "And now you know," I said. "Yes," he said quietly. "Now I know." He was standing close, too close, the sandalwood smell of him reaching me before I could build a wall against it. I could feel the warmth of him along my whole left side, and I was furious at my own body for registering it, for cataloging it, for nodding with any interest whatsoever that the most ruthless man I had ever met was standing close enough to touch and looking at me like I was the most complicated thing in his world. "The man at table 7 has been removed," he said, "permanently." "You should have removed him before he touched me," I said. "Yes," he said simply, "I should have." The admission surprised me so much that I looked up at him and found him already looking at me, and for 3 full seconds we stood at that bar looking at each other, and the noise of the club and the music and the people fell away completely, and there was just the space between us which was too small, and the look in his eyes which was too honest, and the way my pulse was doing something completely unauthorized. I stepped back. "I need to finish my shift," I said. "Floor rotation is canceled," he said. You are back on main stage tomorrow. Why? I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Because no one touches what is mine without my permission, he said. The words should have made me furious. They did make me furious. But they also did something else that I absolutely refused to examine standing in the middle of his club at midnight with my body still burning from humiliation and my heart doing things it had no business doing. I went home. I sat in the dark of my shelter room and pressed my back against the cold wall and put my hands over my face and thought about Ren saying no one touches what is mine, and the way he had looked at me at the bar, and the anger, and the other thing underneath the anger that I could not name and refused to name. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the unknown number, the one that had texted last night, the one that said he was Noah's new cardiologist. It said, Ms. Cassandra, I need you to come to the hospital early tomorrow morning before you go anywhere else. I have looked at Noah's full file, and there is something in it that you need to see. Something about your debt that does not add up. Please come. This is important. I read it 3 times. Something about my debt that does not add up. I looked at the ceiling of my shelter room and thought about 14 months of dancing and $42,000 paid back and $258,000 still remaining, and a surgery that Ren had just agreed to fund. And I thought about the way Ren had said I know about Noah's condition. I was at the hospital told him by 7 a.m. And I thought about the Park was waiting for me outside Noah's ward with 2 cups of coffee, and the kind of face that told me whatever he had found in that file was not small. He was younger than I expected for a cardiologist, Korean, with warm, tired eyes, and the specific energy of someone who had been awake too long thinking about something that bothered him deeply. He handed me the coffee without asking if I wanted it. I liked him immediately for that. Thank you for coming early, he said. I need to show you something. He took me to a small consultation room and opened Noah's file on the table between us and turned it so I could read it. He pointed to a payment record near the back. A large anonymous payment made 8 months ago toward Noah's second surgery. One that my insurance had not covered and that I had not made because I had not had the money. $47,000. Paid anonymously. Someone paid for part of Noah's surgery, Kai said carefully, and nobody told you. I stared at the page. Who? I said. I traced it back through 3 different accounts, he said. He paused. It came from a property company registered to Ren. The room went very quiet inside my head. Ren had paid $47,000 toward my son's surgery 8 months ago and said absolutely nothing to me about it. While I was dancing in his club, every night paying back a debt that he had let me believe was the full picture. While I was counting tips and skipping meals and sleeping in a shelter and carrying the full weight of Noah's medical bills on my back. He had known. He had helped. And he had never said one word. Why are you telling me this? I said. Because you deserve to know the full truth about your situation, Kai said simply. And because whoever this man is to you, you should be making decisions with complete information. I looked at him. At this man who had reviewed a file that was not technically his responsibility yet, and stayed up tracking payments and called me before sunrise because he thought I deserved the truth. Thank you, I said, and I meant it in a way that went deeper than the word. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said something that I was not ready for. How are you holding up? He said. Not Noah, you. Nobody had asked me that in 4 years. I opened my mouth to say I was fine, and what came out instead was nothing because my throat closed completely, and I had to look at the ceiling for a full 5 seconds before I trusted myself to speak. I am managing, I said finally. That is not the same thing as okay, he said. No, I said, it is not. He looked at me with those warm, honest eyes, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Seen, not as a debt or a dancer or a problem to be managed, just seen. Go check on Noah, he said softly. I will be here if you have questions. I sat with Noah for an hour. He was bright and bossy and made me promise to bring him a specific flavor of Jell-O that apparently only I bought correctly, and I promised him and held his hand and looked at his face and thought about Ren paying $47,000 in secret and felt something complicated and angry and confused moving around in my chest that I could not organize into anything clean. That night at the club, Ren put me in the private lounge. Not the main stage, not the floor. The private lounge, which was smaller and darker and full of men who had paid extra specifically because the private lounge had different rules. Softer rules. Rules that benefited nobody except them. I knew it was punishment for walking out of his office last night without giving him what he wanted, whatever that was. The man in the private lounge that night was called Leonard. He was in his 60s with silver hair and soft hands and a wedding ring, and the slow, deliberate patience of a man who had decided exactly what he wanted before he arrived and was simply waiting for the right moment to take it. He watched me perform with his drink in his hand, and his eyes moving over me in a way that made my skin feel like something I wanted to remove and hang on a door somewhere far away from him. After my set, he called me over. I went because this was my job, and no one needed surgery money. I sat across from him and kept the table between us like a shield. He moved to the seat beside me before I could react. His thigh pressed against mine. I shifted away. He shifted with me. His hand came up, and before I could grab it, he closed it over my chest and squeezed and leaned his mouth toward my ear and said things that I will not repeat because some words do not deserve to be remembered. I went completely still. My mind went to a rainy night 4 years ago, a dark doorway, sounds I could not unhear. The specific feeling of a body being treated like it did not belong to the person living inside it. I came back. I grabbed his wrist with both hands and twisted until he made a sound and his hand dropped, and then I stood up and looked down at him and said absolutely nothing because he was not worth my words. I walked to the lounge door and looked directly at the security camera above it. "We are done in here," I said. "Send someone." Ren was in the corridor when I came out. He looked at my face, and something happened in his expression that moved through and disappeared before I could name it. "He touched you," Ren said, not a question. "Your private lounge," I said. "Your client, your responsibility." "He will not walk out of this building the same way he walked in," Ren said quietly. "That is not enough," I said. "Cassandra." "You put me in that room," I said. "You chose that rotation knowing what that room was and what the men in it expected, and you put me in there anyway." My voice was shaking, and I let it shake because I was done performing composure for this man. "Why did you pay for Noah's surgery?" The corridor went completely still. Ren looked at me for a long moment. "Who told you that?" he said. "Answer the question," I said. He straightened his jacket, looked at the wall, looked back at me. "Because it needed to be paid," he said. "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have right now," he said. I looked at him standing in that corridor with his walls up and his jaw tight, and his dark eyes hiding 47,000 reasons he had never told me, and I felt the anger and the confusion, and underneath both of those something even more dangerous. I felt grateful, and I hated myself for it. My phone buzzed. "Kai." It said, "I just saw Leonard's name on tonight's private lounge booking. Please tell me you are okay. I should have warned you earlier. I am sorry." I looked at the message. Looked at Ren. 2 men. One who put me in a room with a predator and paid secretly for my son's surgery and called it just a payment. One who stayed up tracking files and brought me coffee at 7 a.m. and apologized for something that was not even his fault. I did not know what to do with either of them. I typed back to Kai, "I handled it, thank you for checking." His response came in 10 seconds. "You should not have had to handle it alone. You never should have to handle anything alone. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stood in that corridor and read those words and felt them land somewhere that had been empty for a very long time. "Yes," I typed back, "tomorrow." I put my phone in my bag and walked past Ren toward the exit, and he said my name once, and I did not stop. Because if I stopped, I was going to ask him questions. I was not ready for his answers to, and I was too tired and too confused, and too full of feelings I could not sort to do that tonight. Tomorrow I would sort them. Tonight I was going to my son. Kai was already waiting outside the hospital entrance when I arrived, and the look on his face told me that whatever he had found had kept him up all night. He had 2 coffees again. I was starting to understand that this was just who he was. The kind of man who thought about what other people needed before they arrived. The kind of man who showed up with something warm in his hands because he had decided your morning mattered. I took the coffee, and we walked to a bench in the hospital garden and sat in the early quiet, and he told me everything. He had traced the anonymous payment further and found something the first search had not shown him. The debt I had been carrying for 14 months had not been borrowed by my previous manager the way I had been told. It had been borrowed by someone connected to the man who owned Club Noir, in my name, without my knowledge, and the man who owned Club Noir had known for at least 3 months. What Kai did not know was what that man really was. He did not know that Club Noir was the clean surface of something rotten underneath. That the same building where I danced every night was a place where human beings were bought and sold in back rooms I had never been allowed near. That the man collecting my debt had built his empire on hard drugs, moving through Lowe's angels in ways that never traced back to him. That people who got in his way had a habit of disappearing permanently and quietly. Kai knew his father as an absent businessman. He had no idea he was describing a monster. And I sat on that bench holding my coffee and listening to this warm, honest man dismantle my situation with careful hands, and thought about whether telling him the full truth would protect him or destroy him. I decided it would destroy him. So I said nothing about the back rooms. "What do I do with this?" I said instead. "That is entirely your decision," he said, "but you deserve to make it with the full truth in your hands." I looked at him. At this man who had been in my life less than a week and had already given me more honesty than anyone had managed in 14 months. "Why are you doing this?" I said. He looked at me steadily. "Noah is my patient," he said, "which means his mother is my responsibility." He paused. "And if I am being completely honest, it stopped being purely professional somewhere around the second cup of coffee." I felt heat move into my face and looked away. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The old ruthless Mafia boss. I looked at the screen, looked at Kai, answered it. "My office," he said. "Now." "I am at the hospital," I said. "I know exactly where you are," he said. "And I know who you are sitting with. Come now, Cassandra. What we need to discuss should not happen over a phone." He hung up. Kai watched my face. "Go," he said quietly. "Come back and tell me what he says." I went. The old ruthless Mafia boss was standing at his office window when I walked in, his back to me, looking down at the city he had spent 40 years arranging to his advantage. A city that did not know what moved through it at night because of the decisions made in this room. He let me stand there in silence for 30 full seconds before he turned around. That was who he was. A man who used silence the way other men used weapons. "You have been talking to my son," he said. Everything in me went completely still. "Your son," I repeated. "Kai Park," he said. "My son, my estranged son who has apparently decided your situation is worth his personal attention." He looked at me with eyes that had seen things most people could not survive knowing about. "Did he tell you that?" "What Kai tells me is between Kai and me," I said. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something older and more dangerous than anger. "Let me be very clear," he said, walking toward me slowly until he stopped close enough that I had to concentrate on not stepping back. "My son is a doctor in this city because of connections I built before he understood what connections cost. The hospital that employs him has board members who know my name and what it means." His voice was quiet and even and completely without warmth. "I have never used that against him. But if Kai continues placing himself inside my business, I will have no choice." I stared at him. "He is your son," I said. He is making decisions that affect things that belong to me, he said. I do not belong to you, I said. He stepped closer, and I stepped back and hit the wall behind me, and now there was nowhere to go, and he was right there, and I could see every line on his face, and underneath the coldness something that looked almost like a man standing at the edge of something he had not planned for. Stay away from Kai, he said. No, I said. His jaw tightened. The debt, I said before he could speak again. 3 months' Ren, you knew for 3 months that it was never mine and you said nothing. I kept dancing. I kept paying. I kept carrying something that belonged to one of your own men. I felt my voice climb and pulled it back. Look me in the eye and tell me why. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Outside his window, Lowe's angels moved around without caring about any of this, and the old ruthless Mafia boss stood in front of me, and for the first time in 14 months of knowing him, I watched him struggle. Not with the question, with the answer. Because the answer was honest, and honest was not a language this man had spoken in a very long time. Because the debt was the only thing keeping you in this building, he said quietly. I had prepared for those words. They landed anyway. They landed like something dropped from a very great height, and I felt them move through me, and I picked up my bag and walked to the door. We are not finished, he said. We are finished for today, I said without turning around. Cassandra, there are things about your situation that you still do not know, things that go deeper than the debt. His voice stopped me at the door, not because it was threatening, because underneath the ruthlessness it was something I had never heard from him before, something that sounded uncomfortably close to urgent. If you are going to spend time with my son, you need to understand what you are walking both of you into. I turned around slowly. He was standing in the middle of his office, and for one unguarded second, he looked exactly like what he was. Not the Mafia boss, not the creditor, just a 63-year-old man who had built something enormous and terrible and was standing inside it realizing that the walls he had constructed to keep everyone out were now keeping him in. Then tell me, I said, tell me everything. He straightened his jacket. The wall came back up. Not today, he said, but soon, and Cassandra. His eyes held mine across the room. Keep my son out of this until I do, not to protect me, to protect him. I left without answering. I drove to the hospital. I sat with Noah and watched him eat the specific Jell-O Kai had brought and listened to my son explain with complete seriousness that Kai was his favorite doctor because he listened properly and did not talk to him like he was small. He asks me real questions, Mama, Noah said. Like, what is my favorite color and what do I want to be when I grow up? Nobody at this hospital asks me real questions except him. I looked at my son. What did you tell him? I said. I told him my favorite color is the color of your dress on good days, he said. And I told him I want to be someone who fixes things, like him. He pointed his Jell-O spoon at me. I think you should keep him Mama Star. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Eat your Jell-O, I said. He ate his Jell-O with the satisfied expression of someone who had made an excellent point and knew it. My phone buzzed. The old ruthless Mafia boss, one text. It said, the debt terms are changing. Come to the club tonight and think carefully about what my son does not know about the world his father built. Some knowledge protects people. Some knowledge destroys them. Figure out which kind you want to give him before you decide anything. I read it 3 times. Looked at my son. Thought about back rooms I had never been allowed near. Thought about Kai's warm, honest eyes and his complete and total innocence about who his father really was. And understood for the first time that the most dangerous thing in my situation was not the debt or the surgery money or even the old ruthless Mafia boss himself. It was the truth. And I was sitting in the middle of it, trying to figure out how much of it anyone could survive. A call came at 11 p.m. Ren was sitting in his penthouse with an untouched glass of whiskey and the specific restlessness of a man who had spent 40 years being certain about everything and had recently developed an inconvenient uncertainty about one particular thing. His phone buzzed on the desk, his man. The one he had assigned to trace the hospital inquiries. Talk, Wren said. Doctor accessing your accounts through the hospital database, the man said. We have a name. Say it, Wren said. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Park, the man said. Kai Park, cardiothoracic surgeon, St. Ignatius Medical Center, been on staff 3 years. Before that he was in Chicago, before that Seattle, before that he did his residency in New York. Another pause. He left Los Angeles 15 years ago. He grew up here. His father is. Wren set the glass down. The sound of it on the desk was very quiet. That name again, he said. Park, the man said. Kai Park. Sir, his father is. I heard you, Wren said. He hung up. He sat in his penthouse with the city spread below him and the untouched whiskey on the desk, and something moving through his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Not anger. Not the cold calculation he used for problems. Something older and more complicated than either of those things. Kai, his son. His son who had packed one bag at 19 years old and walked out of the city and out of his life, and had apparently walked back in 3 years ago without Wren knowing. His son who had spent 15 years becoming a surgeon. His son who was currently treating a child at St. Ignatius Medical Center and had somehow found his way into Cassandra's life, and had been sitting in that hospital with her every morning drinking coffee and holding her hand. Wren stood up, walked to the window, looked at the city. His son was 2 miles away in that hospital right now, and had no idea that the woman he was developing feelings for danced every night in his father's club to pay off a debt that his father held. The irony of it sat in Wren's chest like something burning. He pressed his hand flat against the cold glass of the window and breathed slowly and thought about 14 months of watching Cassandra from his booth, and the slap that had cracked across his jaw 3 days ago, and the way she had looked at him in his office that afternoon with those eyes that gave nothing away. She had been talking to his son. His son had been holding her hand. His son who did not know who she was to Wren. His son who did not know who Wren was to her. And Cassandra who did not know any of it. He picked up his phone again, put it down, picked it up, put it down. He had not called Kai in 15 years. He did not have a number for him. He had told himself for 15 years that was Kai's choice and he respected it. He had told himself many things over 15 years that he was currently finding difficult to believe. He poured the whiskey down the sink, sat back down at his desk, and did something he had not done in 40 years of running an empire. He did not know what to do next. Across the city in her shelter room, Cassandra was sitting on her cot at midnight staring at the wall, and thinking about the look on Wren's face that afternoon, when he had said, "I will have a name by tonight." She had not told Kai. She had gone back to Noah's room and sat with him through dinner, and listened to his jello arguments, and kissed his forehead and made her promises, and left at 10, and driven home and sat on this cot, since then trying to decide if she had done the right thing by saying nothing. Kai was looking into dangerous accounts. The most feared crime boss in Los Angeles was looking for his name, and she was sitting in the middle of both of them, knowing one thing each of them did not know and feeling the specific weight of information that had no safe place to land. Her phone buzzed. Kai, she stared at the screen, answered it. "I could not sleep," he said. His voice was quiet, the 11 p.m. version of him, softer at the edges. "I kept thinking about what you said, about stopping the digging." A pause. "I stopped, I want you to know that." She exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said. "Are you okay?" he said. "I am sitting on a shelter cot at midnight, so probably not entirely," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me something," he said. "Something that has nothing to do with the debt or the surgery or any of it. Just something true about you." She looked at the ceiling. "I used to want to be a teacher," she said. "Before everything. I used to think I would teach little kids how to read, and I would be the kind of teacher they remembered when they were grown up." She paused. "I have not thought about that in 4 years." "You would be extraordinary at it," he said simply. "You do not know that," she said. "I know how you talk to Noah," he said. "I have watched you explain things to him, the way you make sure he understands, the way you never talk down to him." A pause. "You are already a teacher, Cassandra. You've been teaching that boy how to be brave his whole life." She pressed her hand over her mouth, breath through her nose, looked at the ceiling until the burning in her eyes settled. "Kai," she said carefully. "Yes, the man I owe money to," she said. "He is not just a creditor. The building I work in is not just a club." She chose every word carefully. "There are things that happen there that I have never been part of and have never asked about, because asking about them would have been the most dangerous thing I could do." She paused. "I need you to understand the kind of world that money comes from. Silence on his end. How dangerous, he said quietly. Kind of dangerous that does not leave loose ends, she said. He was quiet for a long time. Cassandra. His voice was very steady. Has he ever threatened you directly? With words, she said, but otherwise. The floor rotation was a message, she said. Leonard in the private lounge was a message. The contract extension is a message. She paused. Everything he does is a message. That is how men like him communicate. She heard Kai breathing on the other end of the line. Like him, he said slowly. Something in his voice had changed. Something had gone very careful and very still. What do you know about his other operations, beyond the club? Nothing specific, she said. And I have survived this long by keeping it that way. Another long silence. I grew up around men like that, he said finally, quietly. Like the words were coming from somewhere he had sealed a long time ago. I know exactly what you're describing. I know what the messages mean, and I know what happens when someone stops receiving them. His voice was steady, but underneath it something was moving that she could hear clearly. You should not be in that building, Cassandra. You should not be anywhere near that man. I know, she said, but Noah needs. I know what Noah needs, he said. I am going to take care of Noah. That is not something you need to trade your safety for. He paused. I mean that, whatever it takes. She sat on her cot in the dark and felt those words land in her chest. Whatever it takes, said by a man who had walked away from this world at 19 and built something clean and honest, and had no idea that the world he had walked away from was sitting 2 miles away in a penthouse window thinking about the name the investigator had just delivered. Get some sleep, Kai said softly. I will see you in the morning. Thank you, she said. For calling. I will always call, he said simply. She put the phone down, lay back on the cot, stared at the ceiling. 3 people in Lowe's Angels at midnight. One sitting on a shelter cot holding a secret she did not fully understand. One standing at a penthouse window holding a name that had changed everything. One at a hospital desk holding a feeling he was not ready to name but was done pretending he did not have. None of them sleeping. All of them thinking about the same impossible situation from 3 completely different directions. And somewhere in the space between all 3 of them, a 4-year-old boy with a rebuilt heart slept peacefully and dreamed about wings, and did not know that his small life had become the single point around which 3 very complicated adult lives were slowly and inevitably beginning to orbit. The morning was going to change everything. None of them knew how much. I have a rule about men. I made it the day I arrived in this city 4 years ago with nothing and nobody, and learned very quickly what happened to women who trusted the wrong ones. The rule was simple. No feelings, no softness, no letting anyone close enough to become necessary. I had Noah and I had my survival instincts, and those 2 things were enough. Kai was making my rule very difficult to keep. He was on the garden bench when I arrived at 7 a.m. with 2 coffees and that face that had absolutely no business being that honest at that hour of the morning. I sat beside him and took the coffee and told myself it meant nothing. People gave people coffee. It was a normal human thing. It did not mean anything that he remembered exactly how I took it without asking. You did not sleep, he said. Neither did you, I said. No, he said. I kept thinking about what you said last night. About the kind of dangerous the man you owe money to really is. He looked at his cup. I grew up around men like that. I know what that world looks like from the inside. He paused. I left it at 19 and I have spent every day since making sure nothing from it ever touched me again. Looked at him, at the specific way he said those words, like they came from somewhere old and sealed and painful. At work, I said. Leaving, did it actually make you free? He thought about it seriously. Mostly, he said. The money I used for medical school came from an account my father set up when I was a child. I told myself it was mine because he owed me something for the childhood I had. He looked at the garden. Some days I still argue with myself about that. I sat with that for a moment. Kai, I said carefully. The man I owe money to, his operations go further than the club, much further. I watched his face. I have never asked questions about the specifics because asking questions in that world is the fastest way to become a problem. I paused. But I have seen enough to know that the people who get too close to his business have a habit of disappearing. Something moved through Kai's expression. How close are you to his business? He said. Close enough to be dangerous, I said. Far enough to still be here. He turned to face me fully on that bench and looked at me with those eyes that never looked away from hard things and said something that went all the way through every wall I had ever built. I am not going to let anything happen to you, he said, not a performance. Not a line, just a man saying a true thing plainly. I looked at him for a long moment. "You cannot promise that," I said. "I know," he said. "I am promising it anyway." I looked at my coffee cup because looking at his face was becoming genuinely dangerous for my rule. "Cassandra," he said. "Yes, when this is over. When Noah is through the surgery and you can breathe again." He paused. "Have dinner with me." I turned to look at him. "Dinner," I said. "Somewhere completely ordinary," he said. "No hospitals, no crisis, no debt, just you and me and a table and food." He held my gaze steady. "I have been trying to find the right moment to ask you that for a week, and I have decided there is no right moment, so I am asking now in a hospital garden at 7 a.m. with bad coffee." I looked at this man, at the 15 years of clean, honest living written all over his face, at the way he asked for things directly without dressing them up or attaching conditions to them, at the specific warmth of sitting beside him that I had been pretending was just the coffee. "Ask me again when the breathing happens," I said softly. "You said that last time," he said. "I know," I said. "So I will keep asking," he said. "Every morning if necessary." Something happened in my chest that I had no good word for, something warm and terrifying that had been building since the first morning. He brought coffee and showed me the truth about my own file without anyone asking him to. I almost smiled. I felt it coming and almost let it happen, and then my phone rang and I looked at the screen and the almost smile went back to wherever almost smiles went when they were not allowed to finish. The most dangerous man in Lowe's Angels. I stood up from the bench. "I have to take this," I said. I walked far enough away that Kai could not hear and answered it. "My office," Ren said. His voice had something in it I had not heard before. Not the cold calculation, not the performance of power. Something underneath all of that, something almost careful. "Tonight at 6, come alone. There are things about your situation that I should have told you a long time ago." I stood in the hospital garden with the morning light coming through the trees and felt something cold move through me. He had never said should have before, should have implied regret. Regret implied something had happened to produce it. "What things?" I said. "On the phone," he said. 6 o'clock, come alone." He hung up. I stood there for a moment holding the phone against my chest and looking at the hospital building in front of me. Somewhere inside that building my son was waking up and asking for his specific Jell-O. Somewhere on that bench behind me, a good honest man was finishing his coffee and probably already planning tomorrow mornings. And at 6 o'clock tonight, I was going to walk into a room with the most feared crime boss on the West Coast, who had just used the words should have, and I had absolutely no way of knowing what came next. I went inside. Noah was sitting up in his bed with his picture book, and his whole face became sunrise when I walked through the door, and I sat on his bed and pulled him carefully into my arms and pressed my face into his strawberry shampoo hair. "Mama, Star," he said. "Kai taught me something today." I said. "He taught me how to read the heart monitor," Noah said, pulling back with enormous pride. "See those lines?" He pointed at the screen beside his bed. "That is my heart saying hello. Every little line is one hello." Looked at me seriously. "Kai says my heart says hello very strongly now, stronger than before." I looked at the monitor, at all those strong, steady lines, at my son's face full of the specific joy of a child who has just been given information that made his situation feel less scary and more interesting. "That is the best thing I have heard all week," I said. "Kai said it too," Noah said, settling back into his pillow. "He said it was the best heart he had fixed in a long time." He paused thoughtfully. "I think he meant it, Mama. Not like when grown-ups say nice things because they are supposed to, like when they mean it all the way down." I looked at my son, at his 4-year-old certainty about the difference between performed kindness and real kindness. "Think he meant it too," I said. Noah nodded satisfied and opened his picture book. I sat beside him and held his hand and watched his monitor say hello in strong, steady lines and thought about 6 o'clock. And the word should have, and the warm weight of Kai beside me on that bench, and the almost smile I had almost let happen. I had a rule about men. I looked at Noah's face. I looked at the door. I thought about Kai saying I am promising it anyway. My rule was becoming very, very difficult to keep. And 6 o'clock was coming whether I was ready or not. I wore the burgundy dress, not because I wanted to impress him, because it was the only clean thing I owned that did not look like a woman who had been sleeping in a shelter for 14 months, and I refused to walk into that office looking like someone he could feel sorry for. I had no idea what should have meant. I had been turning that word over in my mind since 7 a.m., and I was no closer to understanding it at 5. 8:59 p.m., standing outside the club entrance than I had been in that hospital garden. I went in. The club was empty at this hour. No music, no red lights, just the daytime version of it, which was somehow more honest and more unsettling than the nighttime version, because without all the performance it was just a building. Walls and floors and a stage and all the things that had happened on that stage and the debt that had brought me here in the first place. The door to his office was open. Ren was standing at the window. He always stood at that window when he had something difficult to say. I had learned that about him the way I had learned everything about him. Quietly, without intending to, he heard me come in and turned around. He looked at me differently tonight, not the creditor look, not the cold calculation look. Not even the look he wore when he was deciding how much of what he was feeling to let show. He looked at me tonight like a man who had made a decision that had cost him something to arrive at, and was now standing on the other side of it, not entirely sure of the ground. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He stayed standing, which was unusual because Ren always positioned himself to have the physical advantage in every room. The fact that he did not take it tonight told me more than anything he had said so far. He reached into the desk drawer and placed a folder in front of me. "Open it," he said. I opened it. It was a payment record. St. Ignatius Medical Center, Noah's name at the top. A figure that made my breath stop somewhere in the middle of my chest. $47,000, paid 8 months ago. I looked up at him. "You," I said. "Yes," he said. "You paid for Noah's second surgery," I said. "Part of it," he said. I looked back at the folder, at the figure, at my son's name printed cleanly at the top of the page. I thought about 8 months ago when the hospital had told me the insurance shortfall was covered by an anonymous donor, and I had cried in the hospital bathroom for 10 minutes because I could not understand why anyone would do that for a woman they did not know. I understood now, and I did not know what to do with the understanding. "Why?" I said. He walked around the desk slowly and sat in the chair across from me instead of behind the desk, and that small thing, that sitting across instead of behind, made the whole room feel different. "Because I was responsible for what happened to you," he said. "When you first came to this city, the man who hurt you." He held my gaze without flinching. "He worked for me." What he did in a neighborhood that I controlled, to a woman who had nobody to protect her. And I did not know until 8 months ago when he confessed it before I had him removed. His jaw was very tight. "I cannot undo what happened to you that night. I cannot give you back what that cost you, but I could pay for the surgery. So I did." The room was completely silent. I sat in that chair and looked at the most feared crime boss in Lowe's Angels sitting across from me without his desk between us, telling me that the man who had destroyed my first night in this city had worked for him. And that guilt had been sitting in his chest for 8 months while I danced in his building every night paying back a debt. I did not know what I felt. I felt too many things simultaneously to separate them. "Man," I said carefully. "You said removed." "Is not a problem anymore," Ren said. I looked at him. At the flat certainty in his eyes when he said it, I did not ask anything else about that. "Why are you telling me now?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because there is someone in your life," he said slowly, "who is getting close to my operations, and before that situation becomes dangerous for everyone involved, I needed you to understand the full picture of what I am and what I owe you." He leaned forward slightly. "I needed you to have that before I ask you what I am about to ask you." "What are you asking?" I said. He looked at me for a long time. In the quiet of the empty club with the evening light coming through the window and no music and no performance and no debt conversation between us for once, I saw something on his face that I had seen in pieces before but never all at once. The 63 years of him. The weight of everything he had built and everything it had cost. The specific exhaustion of a man who had been powerful for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to simply want something without calculating how to acquire it. "Doctor treating your son," he said quietly. "How close have you let him get?" My whole body went still. "That is not your business," I said. "It is more my business than you know," he said. "Ren, Cassandra." He said my name the way he always said it when he wanted my full attention. Low, direct. Like the word itself was something he had been careful with. "The doctor. His name is Kai Park. I need to know how much you have told him about me." I stared at him. "Do you know his name?" I said. "I know most things," he said. "You had him investigated," I said. "I had the person accessing my accounts investigated," he said. "He was accessing my accounts. That is not something I ignore regardless of who it is." Stood up. He stood up at the same time, and we were both on our feet on the same side of the desk suddenly, and the space between us was too small, and his eyes were doing the thing, and I was doing the thing where I refused to step back, and the air between us was full of everything neither of us had ever said cleanly. "Stay away from him," Ren said quietly. "No," I said. He stepped closer. "You do not understand what you are walking into," he said. His voice was low and urgent in a way I had never heard from him, not threatening, something closer to desperate. "There are things about that man's connection to this world that will change everything when they come to the surface. Things that will put you in the middle of something you cannot navigate." "You do not get to tell me who I see," I said. "I am not telling you," he said. "I am warning you. There is a difference." He was close enough now that I could see every line on his face and the dark, urgent thing moving through his eyes, and I understood suddenly that whatever he knew about Kai, he was not going to tell me. He was going to stand here and warn me away from the one genuinely good thing in my current life without giving me one single reason I could actually use. "Tell me what you know," I said. "If you want me to listen, then tell me everything." His jaw tightened. "I cannot," he said. "Then we are finished talking," I said. I picked up my bag. He said my name once. I walked out. I was 3 blocks away in my car when my phone rang. "Kai," I answered immediately. His voice was different. Something had happened in it. Something careful and controlled in the specific way of a person trying to hold something very large, very still. "Cassandra," he said. "I need to see you tonight, not at the hospital, somewhere else." A pause. "I found something." Something I should have found 3 days ago and did not because I stopped looking when you asked me to. Another pause. "I started again this afternoon." "What did you find?" I said, a silence that lasted long enough to have real weight. "The property company," he said. "The one the payment traced back to." His voice was very steady and very quiet. "It is registered to the same holding group that owns Club Noir." I gripped the steering wheel. "Kai, the man you owe money to," he said. "The man whose club you dance in every night." His voice had gone somewhere I had never heard it go before, somewhere old and closed and cracked back open. "Cassandra, what is his name?" I sat in my car in the dark 3 blocks from Club Noir and thought about Ren saying there are things about that man's connection to this world that will change everything. "His name is Ren," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing I had ever heard. "Kai," I said. "Kai, what is wrong?" When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That is my father's name," he said. I did not sleep. I sat in my shelter room with my back against the cold wall and my phone in my hand, and Kai's words playing on a loop in my head, until the words stopped sounding like words and started sounding like the specific noise a world made when it cracked down the middle. "That is my father's name." 4 words. I had sat in my car for 20 minutes after he said them, just staring through the windshield at the Lowe's Angels night. Kai had gone quiet on the other end of the line. Not the comfortable quiet of the garden bench. A different kind. The kind that came from a person standing at the edge of something enormous trying to decide if they were going to look down. We had agreed to meet at the hospital at 7 and neither of us had said anything else. I had driven back to the shelter and sat on this cot and thought about every conversation I had ever had with both of them and looked for the moment I should have seen it coming and found nothing. There was nothing to find. 2 men who shared blood had spent 15 years becoming strangers, and the only thing that had connected them again was my son's failing heart and my impossible debt and the specific terrible luck of a woman who had arrived in this city 4 years ago with nothing. At 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. Not Kai, Ren. A text that said, "Come to the club. Now, I know you are awake." I stared at the screen. I knew I should not go. I went. The club was dark when I arrived. No staff, no music. Just the emergency lighting along the floor, casting everything in a dim orange glow that made the empty room look like the inside of something dangerous. Ren was standing in the middle of the main floor with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled up and his phone on the stage in front of him, and the expression on his face was something I had never seen there before. He was not cold. He was not calculated. He was furious, not the controlled, jaw-tight fury I was used to from him. Something rower than that. Something that had gotten past the part of him that managed everything and was now sitting fully on the surface with nowhere to go. He looked at me when I walked in, and the look went through me like a current. "You spoke to him tonight," he said. "Yes," I said. "What did he tell you?" I walked to the center of the floor and stopped 10 feet from him and looked at this man who was Kai's father and my creditor and the person responsible for the worst night of my life, and the person who had quietly paid for my son's surgery, and I thought about how nothing in this situation had ever been one clean thing. "He told me who you are to him," I said. Something moved through Ren's face. "And who am I to you?" he said. His voice was quiet, but underneath the quiet something was burning. "Right now," I said carefully, "I do not know." He stepped toward me. I held my ground. "You have been sitting with him every morning," he said, each word deliberate. "You have been letting him hold your hand. You have been telling him things about your life." He stopped close enough that I could see the specific darkness in his eyes that I had learned over 14 months meant he was feeling something he had not given himself permission to feel. "Do you know what it did to me to find out it was my son?" "I did not know he was your son," I said. "Neither did he know who you were." "I know that," he said. His jaw was so tight it looked like it hurt. "I know neither of you knew. That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said it quietly, clearly, without one shred of apology anywhere in it. "Cassandra is mine," he said, "and I will stop whoever comes in my way." The words landed in the empty club and sat there in the orange emergency lighting, and I felt them move through me like something that had been said out loud for the first time but had been true in this man's mind for a very long time. I stared at him. "I'm not yours," I said. "I have never been yours. I am a woman who owes you money and dances in your club, and that is the entire extent of what I am to you." "You know that is not true," he said. "What I know," I said, "is that you just told me you will stop whoever comes in your way, your son. You are talking about your own son." "I am talking about anyone," he said. "Ren. Anyone," he repeated. His voice dropped lower. "I have spent 40 years taking what I wanted and removing what stood between me and it. I did not expect you. I did not plan for you. But you have been standing in the middle of my life for 14 months refusing to be moved, and I have tried every version of cold and controlled and patient, and none of it has changed one single thing about what I feel when you walk into a room." He stepped closer. "So yes, anyone who stands between me and you will find out exactly what kind of man I am." I looked at him. At the 63-year-old crime boss standing in his empty club at 3 a.m. without his armor for the first time since I had known him. Just a man, burning, certain, completely terrifying and completely human simultaneously. "You do not get to claim a person," I said. My voice was shaking, and I let it shake because some things deserve to be said with feeling. "You do not get to look at a woman and decide she belongs to you because you want her to. That is not how people work." "I know how people work," he said. "I have spent 40 years making them work the way I needed them to." "I am not people," I said. "I am Cassandra, and I have never once in my life belonged to anyone except my son." He looked at me. For a long time, he just looked at me, and I saw it happen on his face. The slow, terrible recognition of a man who had just said the most honest thing he had ever said to another person and was watching it land exactly the wrong way, and understanding with perfect clarity that wanting something completely did not mean you had any right to it. His hands, which had been at his sides, opened slowly. Then closed, then he turned away from me and walked to the window and stood there with his back to me and the city outside doing its indifferent 3M thing. "Go home," he said. His voice was different now. Something had gone out of it. "Go home, Cassandra." "Please," he said. I had never heard him say please and mean it that way before, like it cost him. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. "Debt," he said to the window. "It is canceled, all of it, every dollar, effective immediately." I stopped walking, turned around slowly. He was still facing the window. "Why?" I said. "Because I cannot keep collecting payment from a woman I owe something to that no amount of money will ever cover," he said. "And because—" He stopped. His shoulders were very still. "Because you deserved better than every single thing I gave you from the moment you walked into this city." I stood at the door of the empty club at 3 a.m. and looked at the back of the most dangerous man I had ever known, and felt something move through me that I had absolutely no framework for. Not forgiveness, not warmth, something more complicated than either of those. Something that acknowledged that a person could be terrible and human at the same time, and that both things could be true together without either of them canceling the other out. I left without saying anything else. I drove to the shelter, sat on my cot, picked up my phone and looked at Kai's last message. 7 a.m. it said. "I will be there." I pressed the phone against my chest and looked at the ceiling and thought about 2 men from the same blood on opposite sides of everything, and my son's heart beating steadily in a hospital 2 miles away, and the debt that had just been canceled, and what all of it meant for where I went from here. My rule about men said do not feel anything. My rule about men was completely destroyed. Kai was already on the bench when I arrived. No coffee this time. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded and his eyes on the ground in front of him, and he looked like a man who had spent the night inside something painful and had not found his way out of it by morning. He heard my footsteps and looked up, and the expression on his face when he saw me was so unguarded and so raw that I stopped walking for a full second before I made myself continue. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The hospital garden was quiet at this hour. Birds, distant traffic, the specific early morning stillness of a world that did not know or care about the conversation that was about to happen on this bench. "Long have you known?" he said finally. "Since last night," I said. "When you told me," he nodded slowly. "I have known since last night too." He looked at his hands. "I spent 15 years making sure I knew nothing about his life, where he operated, what businesses he ran. I told myself the less I knew, the cleaner I stayed." He paused. "I did not know about Club Noir. I did not know about you. I did not know any of it until last night." "I did not know he was your father," I said. "I did not know you were connected to him in any way." "I know," he said. "I believe you completely." He turned to look at me on the bench, and his eyes were doing the thing they did when he was about to say something he had decided to say regardless of what it cost him. "Does it change anything?" he said. "Between us, what you are learning about where I come from." I looked at him. At this man who had left everything at 19 with one bag and had spent 15 years building something clean with his own hands in cities far away from the one that had made him. At the surgeon who taught 4-year-old boys to read their own heart monitors and brought coffee every morning and asked real questions and meant every single answer he received. "You are not your father," I said. Something moved through his face. "No," he said quietly. "I have spent 15 years making sure of that." He paused. "But he is in your life, Cassandra. He is in your life in ways that are not going to untangle cleanly. And I need you to know that whatever happens with him, whatever that situation requires from you, I am not going anywhere." I pressed my lips together. "He canceled the debt last night," I said. Kai went completely still. "Of it," I said. "He told me at 3 a.m. every dollar gone." Kai was quiet for a long time. "That is not generosity," he said carefully. "My father does not do things without reasons. There is always a reason." "I know," I said. "He say what he wanted in return," he said. I looked at the garden. I thought about Ren saying Cassandra is mine, and I will stop whoever comes in my way. I thought about whether telling Kai that specific thing was going to help either of us right now. I thought about the look on Ren's face when I had said I am not yours, and the way his hands had opened and closed at his sides. "He said he owed me something that money could not cover," I said carefully. "He said canceling the debt was the closest he could get to making it right." Kai studied my face. He was too perceptive to miss that I had not answered his actual question and too respectful to push me on it. "Be careful," he said simply. "I'm always careful," I said. "Be more careful than that," he said. "My father does not let things go. Whatever he has decided about you, he has decided completely, and the fact that he canceled the debt does not mean he has stepped back. With him, it is never that simple." I looked at him. "Know what kind of man he is," I said. "You know the version of him you have seen," Kai said. "I grew up in the full version. I know what he is capable of when he decides something belongs to him." His voice was very steady. "I left this city at 19 because he decided I belonged to his world and I refused. He did not take that refusal quietly." Something cold moved through me. "What did he do?" I said. Kai looked at the garden for a moment. "He made my first 2 years away from here very difficult," he said. "The kind of difficult that only a man with his specific resources could arrange." He paused. Then he stopped. I never knew why. I assumed he found something more important to focus on. He looked back at me. "I think now that he simply found something more important." I sat with that. We went up to see Noah together. He was awake and sitting up in his bed with his breakfast tray, and he looked at both of us walking through the door at the same time, and his entire face became the most satisfied expression I had ever seen on a 4-year-old in my life. "You came together," he said. "We were both here," I said. "Together is different from both," Noah said with the specific authority of a child who had decided this was an important distinction. Kai sat in the chair beside the bed, and I sat on the edge of the mattress, and Noah looked between the two of us with those enormous eyes, and then he did something that neither of us was prepared for. He reached out and took one of my hands. Then he reached out and took one of Kai's hands. Then he placed both of our hands together on top of his blanket and covered them with his small palm, and looked up at us with the complete uncomplicated certainty of someone who had decided something was true and saw no reason to make it complicated. "There," he said simply. "Now we are all connected." I looked at our hands, at Noah's small palm on top of both of ours, at Kai looking at the same thing with an expression that was open and full and completely undone. I felt Kai's hand warm under mine. I felt Noah's hand warm on top, and something happened in my chest that my rule about men had absolutely no answer for. Something that had been building since the first morning, with the coffee and the honest eyes and the real questions. Something that had survived the debt reveal and the father reveal and the 3M phone call and everything else this impossible situation had thrown at it. Something that felt terrifyingly permanent. My phone buzzed on the bed beside me. I looked at the screen, a number I did not recognize. I answered it. A man's voice. Not Ren. Someone working for Ren, cold and professional and completely without feeling. MS. "Cassandra," the voice said. "Mr. Wren would like you to be aware that Dr. Kai Park's medical license review has been formally initiated with the State Medical Board as of this morning. Mr. Wren suggests that Dr. Park consider relocating his practice outside of Los Angeles within 30 days to avoid the full findings being made public." A pause. "Mr. Wren also says to tell you that this is what it looks like when someone comes in his way." Line went dead. I sat on Noah's hospital bed with my hand under Kai's hand and Noah's hand on top of both of ours, and I looked at the blank screen of my phone and felt the specific cold of a trap closing around something I had only just allowed myself to want. Kai was looking at my face. He already knew. "He found out we were here together," Kai said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Noah looked between us with his 4-year-old precision. "Mama Star," he said softly. "Your face is doing the scary thing again." I looked at my son, at his hand on top of ours, at the heart monitor behind him saying hello in strong, steady lines. I looked at Kai, at the man who had left this city at 19 to escape his father's world and had spent 15 years building something clean and was now watching that clean thing being threatened because he had chosen to sit on a hospital bench every morning with the wrong woman. I looked at my phone, at the message from the man who had said Cassandra is mine, and I will stop whoever comes in my way. And I understood with complete and terrible clarity that the most dangerous man in Los Angeles had just made the most dangerous move he had ever made in 40 years of being dangerous. He had used my feelings as the weapon. I called Ren myself, not because I was afraid, not because this ruthless mafia's phone call had broken me the way he intended it to. I called him because 14 months of surviving this man had taught me one thing above everything else. The only way to deal with the most dangerous Korean crime boss in Los Angeles was to walk directly toward him instead of away from him. Running was what he expected. Running was what gave him power. I was done giving him power. He answered on the first ring. "Your office," I said. "Now, and Ren. If you send anyone to that hospital while I am gone, I will walk into a federal building and say every single thing I know about every back room in your club and every operation connected to it. Do you understand me?" Suddenly, there was silence from him. "I will be here waiting," he said. I turned to Kai in the hospital corridor. He had heard everything. He was looking at me with that expression he wore when he was seeing me clearly and not trying to manage what he saw, and I looked back at him and thought about Noah putting our hands together on the blanket 20 minutes ago and the permanent feeling that had arrived in my chest and decided to stay without asking my permission. "You do not have to do this," Kai said. "I do," I said. "Cassandra." He stepped toward me. "He is my father. This is my problem to solve. You should not be the one walking in there. Did not threaten your license to get to you," I said. "He threatened it to get to me. That means I am the one who has to walk in there and end it." I looked at him. "Stay with Noah, please. I need to know he is with you while I do this." Kai looked at me for a long time. Then he reached out and held my face in both his hands the way he had been wanting to do for weeks, and looked at me with everything he felt completely visible on his face, and said nothing because some things did not need words and some moments were too important for them. He kissed me, soft, warm, brief. The kind of kiss that was a promise rather than a question. The kind that said, "I will be here when you come back." The kind I had not allowed myself to receive from anyone in 4 years because receiving things meant having something to lose. I had something to lose now. That was terrifying. That was everything. I drove to the club. Ren was behind his desk when I walked in. He looked at me when I came through the door, and something moved through his expression that I had learned over 14 months to read. He had not expected me to come alone. He had not expected me to come at all. He had sent that message expecting me to panic and make desperate decisions from a place of fear. I pulled a chair to the front of his desk and sat down and looked at him directly. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. "You are going to withdraw the medical board complaint, today, within the hour, and you are going to leave Kai completely alone from this moment forward. His career, his life, his presence in this city, all of it untouched." Ren looked at me. "And if I do not," he said. "Then I walk out of this building, and I call a federal investigator whose card has been sitting in my kitchen drawer for 3 months, I said. "The one who left it when he came to ask me questions about the back rooms I was never supposed to know existed." I held his gaze. "I have spent 14 months in your building, Ren. I have seen things from that stage that you did not intend for me to see. I have heard conversations in corridors I was not supposed to be in. I have remembered all of it. Every detail." Room was very quiet. "You would not," he said. "I would," I said. "For him, I would do it without hesitating." Something happened on Ren's face, not anger, worse than anger, understanding. He sat back in his chair and looked at me with the specific expression of a man receiving information that confirmed something he had been refusing to believe and could no longer refuse. "You love him," he said. I looked at Ren. At the 63-year-old Mafia crime boss, who had been the most constant and most dangerous presence in my life for 14 months, who had paid for my son's surgery in secret, and canceled my debt, and kissed me without permission, and stood in this empty club at 3 a.m. without his armor claiming that Cassandra was his with everything he had, who had built something enormous and terrible, and was sitting inside it at his desk, finally understanding that the one thing he wanted in the world was sitting across from him, telling him clearly and without apology that she wanted something else. "Yes," I said. "I love him." Silence that followed was the longest and most complete silence I had ever sat inside. Ren looked at his desk, at his hands, at the city through the window, at all the things he had built and acquired and controlled for 40 years that were sitting around him right now being completely useless. Then he picked up his phone. He made a call. I sat across the desk and listened to him tell someone on the other end to withdraw the medical board complaint immediately and completely. I listened to him use the voice he used when something was final and not to be questioned. I listened to him hang up and put the phone down on the desk between us. He looked at me. "It is done," he said. I exhaled. "Thank you," I said. "Do not," he said quietly. We looked at each other across the desk, across 14 months of debt and power and complicated, terrible things, and the surgery payment he had never mentioned, and the assault he had carried guilt about for 8 months, and every charged corridor moment, and the 3M confession, and all of it. "He is my son," Ren said finally. So quietly I almost did not hear it. I did not know he was back in this city. I did not know he was treating Noah. I did not know any of it until 4 days ago. He looked at his hands. He became a surgeon. Something moved through his face. He became the thing that was the furthest possible distance from everything I am. I said, "He did. That is not an accident," Ren said. "No," I said, "it is not." He was quiet for a long moment. "Is he good to you?" he said. I looked at him, at the question that had cost him everything to ask. "Yes," I said. "He is very good to me." Ren nodded once, slowly, like a man receiving a verdict he had known was coming and had decided to receive with whatever dignity he had left. "The surgery," he said. "The funding stands. That is not conditional on anything. It never was." He looked at me. "Noah gets his surgery, whatever else happens. That does not change." I looked at this man, at the monster and the human being sitting together in the same body the way they always had. At the terrible things he had done and the true things underneath them. At the specific tragedy of a person who had learned too late that power was the wrong currency for the things that actually mattered. "I know," I said. I stood up. He stood up. We looked at each other across the desk one more time. "Cassandra," he said. "Yes, what it is worth." He held my gaze. "You were the first person in 40 years who made me want to be something different." He paused. "I did not know how to do that. I only knew how to do this." He gestured at the office, at the building, at the empire. By the time I understood what I was doing wrong, it was already done. I stood at the door, looked at him, at the 63-year-old man standing in his office in the middle of everything he had built that had not been enough. "It is not too late," I said carefully. "To be something different, it is never too late for that." I paused. "Your son is 2 miles away. He has been in this city for 3 years, and you did not know because you were not looking." I held his gaze. Maybe start there. I left. Noah's surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Kai performed it. I sat in the waiting room for 4 hours with my hands folded in my lap and my lips moving in the thing that was not quite prayer and not quite bargaining, and waited for my son's heart to come back to me. It came back. Kai walked through those surgical doors at the 4-hour mark and looked at me across the waiting room and nodded once, and I stood up from that plastic chair and pressed both hands over my mouth and felt every single thing I had been holding for 4 years release all at once. Not quietly, not efficiently, completely. He crossed the room and held me while I cried and said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said, and he understood that better than anyone. When Noah woke up, he looked at me and then looked at Kai standing beside me and said with full 4-year-old authority, "I told you my heart would come back. It always comes back, because it knows where home is." I laughed. Kai laughed. Noah looked between us with that satisfied expression he wore when the world was arranging itself the way he had decided it should. "Home is wherever you both are," he said simply. "That is just a fact." I looked at Kai over my son's head. He was looking back at me with those eyes that had stopped being sad somewhere between the first coffee and this moment and were now something else entirely. Something warm and certain and completely present. I thought about my rule, the one I had made 4 years ago in this city with nothing and nobody, no feelings, no softness, no letting anyone close enough to become necessary. I looked at my son. I looked at Kai. I let the rule go, completely, quietly, without apology. Later that evening, a letter was delivered to the hospital addressed to Kai. He opened it in the corridor outside Noah's room while I watched his face. He read it twice. His expression was complicated in the way of someone receiving something they had stopped hopping for a long time ago. He showed it to me. It was a single handwritten line on plain paper in handwriting I recognized. It said, "I would like to have coffee with my son, if he is willing. I will wait as long as it takes." Kai folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket, looked at the wall for a moment, then he looked at me. "I spent 15 years running," he said quietly. "I am tired of running." "You do not have to decide tonight," I said. "I know," he said. He looked at Noah through the window, at the small figure sleeping with his picture book and his strong, steady heart saying hello on the monitor. He would want me to try, would he not? I looked at my son, at the 4-year-old who shared everything even when there was not much to share, who put hands together and said, "Now we are all connected," who believed without any evidence that hearts always found their way home. "Yes," I said. "He would." Kai put his arm around me. I leaned into him. We stood in that hospital corridor together and looked at my son sleeping, and I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The pole and the fall and the debt and the floor rotation and Leonard and the rape memory and the slap and the alley crying and the shelter cot and the 3M confessions and the canceled debt and the medical board threat and the impossible choice and all of it. Every single hard and terrible and complicated thing. Leading here, to this corridor, to this man's arm around me, to my son's heart beating strongly on the other side of that window. I pressed my hand flat against Kai's chest and felt his heartbeat under my palm, steady, real, present. And I thought about Noah saying home is wherever you both are. That is just a fact. My son was 4 years old and he was the wisest person I had ever known. And he was right, this was home. All the rest of it had just been the road to get here, and every single step of that road had been worth it for this, for him, for us. For the heartbeat under my hand that had chosen me the same way I had chosen it, completely, without apology, forever.